To the Point with Congressman Bill Pascrell, focusing on the concerns and issues facing the families of New Jersey's 9th Congressional District.
Hello, I'm Congressman Bill Pascrell. I'd like to welcome you to the latest edition of To the Point. This February marked a centennial that passed with little fanfare: the authorization for Congress to levy a federal income tax under the 16th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Although we've been paying federal taxes for more than a century now, there hasn't been an overhaul of the tax code in nearly a generation. As Congress continues working on a path towards tax reform, most Americans would agree that our current tax code could well use a rewrite. Unnecessary complexities have led to taxpayers spending 7.6 billion hours and roughly 140 billion a year to comply with the daunting requirements and countless pages of paperwork. At the same time, big corporations like Apple and Google have been in the news for taking advantage of huge loopholes that allow them to shift their massive profits overseas and to avoid paying taxes here at home. Many of the highest earning individuals often end up paying lower tax rates than working Americans like teachers or cops, firefighters. Reforming our tax code gives us an opportunity to create a fair system and also could stimulate job growth and create new economic opportunities while closing gaping loopholes. With me today are two people that have spent their careers working on tax policy to shed some light on how we are going to fix our nation's tax system and what this means for the taxpayer like you and me. Mark Mazur is the Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy with the United States Department of Treasury and is responsible for developing, analyzing, and coordinating Treasury's and the White House's agenda, its policies, and the guidance in tax issues. Mark has spent 23 years working for the federal government, including positions at the Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation, the President's Council of Economic Advisors, and the National Economic Council under President Clinton and the Department of Energy. Len Berman is director of the Tax Policy Center, a joint venture of the Urban Institute and the Brookings Institute that provides analysis about tax policy to policymakers, journalists, researchers, and the public. Len is also professor of public administration and international affairs at the Maxwell School of Syracuse University and the senior research associate at Syracuse University Center for Policy Research. Len is author of the book, and I've looked at that book and read the book, Taxes in America, which offers an in-depth analysis of our nation's tax system and how it can be improved. Thank you both for being here, and I'm really honored with people of your distinction to come on our show and talk to people straight across. That's why you're asked to be here, so you're not going to water any of the wine, and that's a good sign. I got a question to throw out, and I would direct the question to Len, but I want you to jump in, Mark, because I think it's very basic to what we're talking about. How does this tax system, how did it get to where it is right now, and what will it take to change course? And do we need to change course in the direction that it's going? Start us off, Len.
Well, it's certainly a mess, as you pointed out in your introductory remarks. I mean,
and let's talk about, we're talking about federal taxes. Because people hear taxes, they're talking about, Congressman, what are you going to do about my property tax? What are you going to do about my dog license fee now that this ended up? So we're talking about federal taxes, everybody. Remember that. Go ahead, Len.
And we're mostly talking about federal income taxes.
Right.
Although for most Americans, the biggest tax they pay is the payroll tax. And most people don't really object to that because it pays for Social Security and Medicare, which they want. The income tax is really complicated. In part, it's complicated just because people's lives are complicated. Self-employed people, their situation would be complex no matter what. But it's also complicated because, in part because of the pressures on members of Congress to do things, to try to address problems. And increasingly, they've been doing it through the tax code. There are more than 200 individual, we call them tax expenditures, which is a really nerdy term, but basically it means that they're kind of spending programs that are run through the tax code. And they're subsidies for all sorts of different activities. They're all well intended. I know you've been at lots of hearings where you've talked about these different things. Probably some of them should be in the code, but the problem is that a lot of these things really aren't worth the complexity they create for people. They create opportunities for tax avoidance, and it also sort of creates this funny situation where, basically you owe a bunch of tax to the government, but the government says, well, if you fill out all of these forms, you can get some of it back, which to me seems like a bad deal.
So the tax system, it seems to me, Ways and Means Committee would deal with this subject every day. But it seems to me that what you make, what you gather in as income or assets or whatever the case, maybe we'll get to that, you want to protect to the best of your ability.
Right.
Now, if you're a big corporation, okay, if you're fairly well-to-do, you can hire 50 lawyers to protect that. The regular guy can't do that. He can't afford to hire all these attorneys.
Right.
And that's where this list of deductibles and specialties grows and grows and grows. And yet, I'll give you a tough argument, Len, if you want to take away the mortgage income deductible, the interest deductible. I'll give you a tough argument. I mean, it would bury New Jersey, I think.
Okay, but let's actually take it's a great example. So when we talk about closing loopholes, it kind of sounds like, well, of course
you want to
consider
that a loophole,
you don't want to. Well, but when you look at that list of tax expenditures, the mortgage interest deduction is right at the top of the list, along with the tax break for health insurance, which people also like. But the thing about the mortgage interest deduction is that it doesn't help a lot of people in New Jersey. Only 30% of people itemize their deductions. They're the only ones who can get any benefit at all. 30%.
30%.
And they're the only ones who can get any benefit at all from the mortgage interest deduction. Right. And among those, a lot of them don't actually get much benefit because if they're hardly better off than they would be if they didn't add up all the receipts and take the deductions anyway.
But it's different in every state, though.
It is different in every state. But
depending on how that state depends upon income of the property taxes.
Yeah. But the property taxes, state and local taxes, I guess one benefit of being in New Jersey, New York, where I lived for 4 years, is those taxes make you want to itemize every year. But the thing is that the biggest benefit goes to the people who don't really need help paying for housing, people in the 39.6% tax bracket. Most people get little or nothing, and it probably pushes up housing prices. You could take some of the money that goes into the mortgage interest deduction, you could retarget it so that it was really aimed at middle-income people, the people who really need help.
Would you needs test that deductible?
Well, you could make it into, say, a 15% credit and not make people itemize at all. Most people would be better off with that, and the government would save money.
Mark, what do you think about that, Mark?
I think part of what you want to do with the tax system is you want to look at an efficient way to raise revenue. You want to do it in a way that's fair, or perceived as fair, and you want to do it in a way that's administrable and simple so that individuals can understand what's going on. So they don't need to go and get professional help to do their taxes. I think on the mortgage interest deduction, you can argue both ways on that. You can argue that, as Len does, that you could target it better and have better outcomes for housing and better outcomes for support of the housing market and cost less revenue in the long run. Or you could keep it in place, as we've done, because it is perceived as popular. You probably get incoming letters from all kinds of folks associated with the real estate industry who rely on that as a selling point.
Not so much a selling point, but it sustains people in their homes. I don't think people buy a home because they can deduct it from their income tax. I think they buy a home because they like the place, the schools, whatever the case may be. However, in sustaining it down, they like the idea, even if it's only 30%, they like the idea of going in on their income tax and making that deduction so they get something back on paying property taxes to the local community. But I don't have the sense that that's going to change. Do you?
It would be a big political lift for it to occur.
Although actually the administration,
they have
a proposal that would limit the subsidy somewhat. Basically, right now the value of your deduction depends on your tax bracket. So 39.6 bracket, you get huge subsidy from the government.
39.6 cents per dollar.
Yeah, and if you're in the 10% bracket, you get 10 cents or actually even less.
Yeah.
So the Obama administration proposed to limit the value of the subsidy to 28%. So most people would be unaffected by this at all, but people at the very top would get a little haircut on
Do you
this.
think that that has a good chance of being reformed this year?
No.
Do you think it does?
We proposed as part of the budget. It's sort of up to you on the Ways and Means Committee to consider it. I don't see any movement, though, at this point.
You don't see Chairman Camp has talked about, and the head of the Ways and Means Committee, really pushed tax reform. This is not the environment?
Tax reform is a big lift, generally. You're going to have a lot of people who perceive themselves as losing tax benefits. You'll have some people who perceive themselves as gaining tax benefits, but generally the losers are more vocal than the winners. And so politically, it's just a big lift. And I think Chairman Camp's held hearings. He's done a ton of educational work for the committee. I think he's done the necessary work to move forward on this. It would be great for him to move forward on this in a bipartisan way.
You don't think it's going to happen, though?
Not this year. It's just a big political lift.
Well, you know, that brings up another topic. When people are we're talking about the federal taxes here, and people are burdened by property taxes. People are burdened by excise taxes. The people are burdened by a lot of different taxes. People don't realize right now that they're actually paying less of their income in income taxes than they were 50, 40, 30, 20 years ago. Am I correct in stating that?
I think that's right, certainly for most people. The rates are much lower.
Right.
When I came to Washington, top rates were 50%. In the 1960s, they were
Kennedy changed
they were
that,
above
didn't
90%. Yeah. So tax rates are lower. In a lot of ways, the tax code is better than it was, 30 or 40 years ago. But
we got all these thousands of pages in the code. But who put those pages there? Joe the barber did not.
Well, they kind of
Harry
did.
the truck driver did not. Who put all these pages in the tax code?
They kind of did, though.
Yeah,
because,
I hear
because
conservatives talking about this all the time. This massive tax code. Who put them there?
Well, you did.
Well, yeah, the Ways and Means Committee did that for sure. Yeah. We haven't put any in lately, but who has the opportunity, the wherewithal, the financial backing to do something like that?
Well, there's two ways to look at that. I think one is that there is often a demand for doing something with the tax code. For instance, providing tax incentives for education. And that would come from middle-income people saying that we would like some additional help with education financing.
Is this presently deductible?
So the American Opportunity Tax Credit is a tax credit that the Obama administration pushed to make higher education affordable for middle-income families. That was probably driven by middle-income folks. On the other hand, you have
that was not coming from corporate America.
On the other hand, you have
corporate
interests and high-income individuals looking for ways to shelter or lower their tax bills.
When we come back after the break, I'm gonna ask you both, what is needed really to move us in a different direction for a fairer code? But first of all, I want to know, do you think that the code is fair or not fair right now? And then how do we make it fair? And then I want to get into the subject of redistribution of wealth in America, which Democrats, I told you before, we're not supposed to even talk about. The last thing you want us to use is the word redistribution. For sure they'll call you a socialist. But we've had a redistribution of wealth. We'll get back to that in just a moment, and we'll be back with our guests. Just hang in there.
For the millions living with COPD, breathing becomes a real struggle. COPD stands for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, but you may have heard of it as chronic bronchitis or emphysema. Over time, it makes it harder and harder to breathe until you feel like you're breathing through a straw. COPD is the 4th leading cause of death in the U.S. It kills 1 person every 4 minutes, and it took my grandmother. An estimated 24 million Americans are affected, but as many as half of them don't even know it. It's a race against time to spread the word about this serious disease. If you're over 35 and have ever smoked, you could be at risk. The good news is, there are steps you can take to improve your symptoms. I'm Danica Patrick, and I drive for COPD. Take action today to breathe better tomorrow. Join the movement at driveforcopd.com. Take our screening questionnaire today and talk to your doctor.
We're back with our guests, Mark Mazur and Len Berman. Thank you so much for doing this today. Is the tax system fair, Mark?
I think overall, people's perception of the tax system.
The federal tax code.
Overall, the perception of the tax system is that people perceive it as unfair. But if you look at the data seem to indicate that higher income people pay a larger share of their income on average than lower income people. So in a sense, the federal income tax, at least, is based on ability to pay and generally viewed as fair. If you add all the other taxes together, excise taxes, payroll taxes, corporate income taxes, again, the distribution is progressive in that higher income folks pay a larger fraction of their, or bear a larger fraction of the burden than lower income folks.
What do you think the percentages of people who, and don't forget your thought, but what do you think the percentages of people who don't pay any income tax but pay all the other federal taxes? What's the percentage that doesn't pay any federal income tax?
It's actually
43%.
43% pay no income tax.
But the vast majority of those people pay payroll taxes. They pay 15. I mean, between their employers and themselves, they pay 15% of their wages. Social Security and Medicare. They pay excise taxes. They pay state and local taxes. They've got. I mean, they're plenty. They're taxed plenty enough.
Right.
I mean, among the people who don't pay any. We can't find any federal taxes that they pay. I mean, some of them are just really poor. It's a really tiny fraction. About 20% of them are old people who are just retired. And we decided that if you're just living on Social Security, we're not going to take a tax hit from that.
So it's an easy target for some folks down here to say in Washington, well, these people pay, they're all drifters. They're all hangers on. That's not the case when you look into that 40 some odd percent who don't pay any income tax. They pay all the other federal taxes as well on limited incomes for the most part, and yet there are some people who are very, very rich who don't pay any taxes. How does that happen?
Well, some of them are earning their income overseas, and we don't tax it in the U.S. until they bring it home. Some of them,
if they ever bring it home,
if they ever do. Some of them get a lot of income from tax-exempt bonds.
What's that called, repatriation?
Yeah. Some of them have a lot of tax-exempt bonds. They're wealthy, but we just decided that most tax-exempt bonds are never subject to U.S. income tax.
Do you think that's fair?
Do I think it's
fair? You think it's fair that you could take your money offshore?
I mean, it depends. There are some legitimate purposes for which you would actually be investing overseas. I actually think you should be taxed on your worldwide income. And Treasury actually has some proposals.
As Bill Bradley would say, you should tax income.
Yeah, you should tax income. I actually want to make a point about what Mark was saying in your answer to the question about fairness, and I think you would have said this as well, is that there are two notions of fairness. One is when your income goes up, do you pay more? And the answer is that for the most part, the federal tax system is progressive. State taxes are not so much. But there's another measure of fairness, which is how you treat people who are kind of similar. And our tax system, they're wildly different tax rates depending on what kinds of things you do or how good your tax lawyer or accountant is.
Can you get a good for instance there?
Just have regular interest income and interest from tax-exempt bonds. You could earn the exact amount of income, and one is taxable, one's not taxable.
Or if you have a big account in the Cayman Islands.
Yeah, and that brings us to the subject and topic we talked about just very briefly before, and that is income distribution.
Right.
When one looks at the last 50 years, it would seem to me, objectively, and tell me if I'm wrong, correct me, that we've had a redistribution of wealth, that more wealth has risen to the top. Let's get past the argument, well, some people work and some people are just lazy. We're beyond that. That's not the case. And everybody should be working. And if they're not, and they can, they should be punished financially, not taken to jail or anything, but financially. But am I right in saying that there has been a redistribution upward and that the working person can keep less of his money now than 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago? Is that an exaggeration? Is that hyperbole?
I mean, I guess I would view it in a somewhat different way, which is that the economy has become more and more skewed towards people at the very, very top.
Now, how did that happen?
I mean, in part.
That's important.
Globalization.
Well, globalization. I mean, more technology. I mean, a big thing is like CEOs,
which is not available to the average working person.
It's not available to
Len?
the average working person. The other thing is that it used to be that CEOs were well paid. They lived in nice parts of New Jersey, but they weren't making hundreds of millions of dollars. And for reasons I don't fully understand, that the people at the very, very top just earn enormous wages, and people, at the middle tiers, they're doing okay, but they're not great. And middle income people in the United States, their incomes have been flat for the last 30 or 40 years.
And why? What caused that flat 30, 40-year period where wages have not gone up for the average working male, female in this country?
Economists argue over that a lot.
Yeah.
One of the things is decline of unions. So there's less bargaining power for middle-class people. Second, I think
that doesn't sound like Walmart.
Second, I think, is this idea Len has talked about, kind of a redistribution where folks who are able to capture larger gains from productivity in the organization do, whereas 30, 40, 50 years ago they may have had more of a paternalistic view of their company and kind of not taking quite so much for themselves.
The anger about more people beginning to understand this, Mark and Len, has led to all kinds of political movements, political gestures, and I think that if you peel back the onion, you will see that there's a lot in common between the Tea Party and many people on the far left. Go ahead.
Actually, let me make...
You agree, disagree with that?
I do, actually. I mean, if they actually understood.
It's a pretty scary thought.
But part of what's happening, it used to be that technology helped everybody. When Henry Ford learned how to set up the assembly line, people got good wages because they became all of a sudden more productive. Yeah. One person could produce lots and lots of cars. Now, technology, we've got two kinds of technology. There's still a technology that makes some people more productive, particularly the people who can use the machines and are well educated. There's another kind of technology that replaces low-wage workers and even middle-wage workers increasingly. Every time you go to the grocery store and you check out at one of those automated checkout things, that's pushing down wages for the people who actually do work behind the counters. There's going to be more and more and more of that. And there is a real concern that going forward that the people who own the capital, the people who own those machines, are going to get more, get huge gains. But the people who can be replaced by them, you're not going to pay a checker more than it costs to pay for the machine, and the price of those machines is going to go down.
Mark, how come we do not discuss more of what Len and you and I are just talking about this right now? How come we don't discuss this, formal discussions, committee discussions about this distribution of wealth? We talked about this 20, 30 years ago, that's communism, socialism, redistributing. The federal government should not be trying to move income from this person to that person. And there is a grain of truth in that. We're not a socialistic system. We don't want to pretend to be or aim at that. But on the other hand, 30 years ago when we changed tax codes, and when we started to tax income more than assets, because you can hide assets overseas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, nobody got up and said, we're going to redistribute the wealth, take it away from the middle class and give it to the rich. That didn't happen. What are we missing here, and why aren't we discussing this more?
I think you need more of a debate on what kind of an economy is sustainable. I think the President's been clear about an idea of growing the economy from the middle out. Having a strong middle class has been historically important for the American economy. So we need to do things that would address middle-class jobs. We need to invest in education. We need to invest in the types of capital, infrastructure, roads, bridges, and so on that they need to thrive. And as a country, we've not made those important investments in the last decade or so.
You think the President's saying the middle-class cutoff here for non-taxation, $250,000. Is that a good number? Is that a poor number? Is it a debatable number, Len?
I think it's a debatable number. I mean,
what's your thoughts?
I mean, my thought is that $250,000 is above the level at which most of the people working at the White House get paid. So it seems like that must be rich people. But it's a very cynical view. But
I like it.
I want to make just two more points about the inequality discussion. One thing is that invest, as Mark said, investing in education, getting more people in a position where they can benefit from the machines rather than be replaced by them is really huge. And in a lot of ways, our educational systems are collapsing. State universities all around the country are under pressure. Tuitions, especially in private schools, are through the roof. And we need to make more opportunities available. And we actually need to invest earlier, too, so kids are ready to go to college. You
would support federal investment in higher education and in education as having a very good consequence?
I think they pay very large returns. The other thing is there is a role for the tax system. And the tax system, particularly a well-designed tax system can mitigate economic inequality. If you look at the distribution of income before taxes and after federal taxes in particular, the people are a lot better off. Middle and lower income people are a lot better off for the tax system than they would be if we just, if we had, say, a flat tax or something like that. And you could do more of that. Actually, another thing which contributes to the flat incomes for the middle is rising healthcare costs. And if you can do things to control healthcare costs, and I know an objective of the Affordable Care Act is to do that, that also would help because a lot of middle-income people's wages are now just going to pay for healthcare.
Wow, you said a mouthful. Mark, what do you think about that?
Well, you also have a situation where in some parts of the tax system, it exacerbates income inequality. For instance, there's a carried interest loophole for hedge fund managers to take what essentially are earnings, compensation for their services, and turn it into capital gains income, which is more lightly taxed. Yeah. That encourages this activity to transform ordinary income into capital gains income. Doesn't benefit generally the economy as a whole, certainly benefits the individuals who take advantage of it.
That's a very important point. We tried in 2007 to change that. I remember Charlie Rangel leading us in that direction, but we didn't get too much help on the other side of being more fair. So the tax system can be fair. The tax system is necessary. There needs to be a code. We want to take some advantages away from those who make a lot of bucks, and because they got so many lawyers and they can take the money offshore, which the average person cannot do. Look, thank you, Leonard. Thank you, Mark. You've done a great job. We want to come back to this issue again. I'm going to have you back on again.
Appreciate it.
With your permission, of course. And we're going to talk about where do we go from here if reform doesn't work out in the next 2 or 3 months. Yeah. And God knows what's going to happen on whether we shut this place down again or not. We hope not. We pray not. But it's people like you that need to be heard more often to put things into perspective so that the average person sitting on his couch right now watching us and has all weird, sometimes mythical ideas about how the tax system works, and like they bring together property taxes and excise taxes or income taxes, so they blame everybody. So they blame everybody. I want to be blamed for what I did. I don't want to be blamed for what your governor does or your state legislator does or whatever the case may be. I was one of those at one time. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Len. And thank you for watching this edition of To The Point. You've heard our thoughts. Now I would like to hear what you think about today's show. If any comments, if you have concerns or questions, stay tuned. Our address, our phone number, our website and address will appear in a moment. Thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you next time on To The Point.